every few years, we get a new region of Pokemon that we're introduced to with a whole new slew of Pokemon. Love them or hate them, we typically get a good variety of new options that are available, and in most games, we'll also see some of our favorites return as well. Despite this, there are some Pokemon that I feel were either introduced in the wrong region, or at least could have come out at a different time. So today, I want to break down my 10 Pokemon that I feel could be introduced in alternate regions. But if you guys know of any Pokemon I may have missed that should have been from other regions, make sure to let me know in the comments below, as I'd love to see what ideas you guys come up with. Before we start though, I am currently live again on Twitch, and I am working on a book where I use lo-fi beats as inspiration. I will leave my Twitch and Luna's World in the description below. With that, let's get started. For our first and only joint entry, we have a duo of Pokemon from the Galar region that could have been introduced in the Kalos region, Ceruledge and Armarouge. These two branch off the evolution for Charcadet, and they also fit in pretty well with the Galar region too. For starters, let's talk about the obvious, being how on the nose this timing would have been, considering the names of the games are literally Sword and Shield. The connection for Ceruledge should honestly be pretty obvious, but I'd argue even Armarouge, being the armor Pokemon, could have strong ties to a shield exclusive option due to the purpose of armor being able to shield you from enemies. It would also have been pretty cool to give the region two non-legendary options that would thematically tie into our main mascot legendaries. While it's not exactly an expectation for games to do this, it'd be cool to potentially include both a sword legendary and a sword non-legendary as new options in the same region. Also, the Galar region in general would be a great fit for these due to their European design focus, which, like with the Paldea region, would also have some great ties to Galar. While I don't think it'd have been the most tangible effect on the franchise, I do believe that this would thematically have been a cool introduction in Generation 8, and I'm almost curious if they had initially created the concepts in Generation 8, but didn't finalize them in time for Sword and Shield's release. One of the few Pokemon who I think could be pushed back not only one game, but several generations, we have Jumpluff, who I believe would be a great fit for the Kalos region. Let's get something out of the way. The Kalos region is a fairly barren region when it comes to new Pokemon. While they were responsible for introducing many cool Mega Evolutions, these games had very few new options for players. Moving Jumpluff back to these games would already be a fairly good start. But why specifically Kalos? Well, for starters, Jumpluff already is a regional dex option in Kalos, and it even ended up on the gym leader Ramos's team in these games. Jumpluff also has a fairly non-region specific design, but it would still be an easy option to just throw into any nature-based section of the games. While I wouldn't say that Johto was exactly a bad fit, I just don't really see why Jumpluff specifically as a Pokemon fits into this region. But at least with Kalos, it could fit well in the same region as options like Florges. I think this at least could have been a cool addition to the Kalos region for sure. But overall, Kalos just needed a wider Pokédex in general. Speaking of Kalos, we have another Pokemon that I feel could also fit well into this region, being Cinccino. When I look at Cinccino, the first thing I think of is a well-kept Pokemon that has itself all clean and proper with this smooth, sleek design. In a region where we could give options like Furfrou different haircuts, and the first region where player fashion was an aspect of the games, I feel like such a stylish Pokemon could have been a really cool addition. Cinccino would have fit well into areas similar to Furfrou as an additional normal type option. Players could have caught Furfrou if they were looking for a normal type without room to improve its stats through evolution. Or they could obtain Minccino, which would have potential to evolve into a stronger option despite starting off weaker. While I don't hate Cinccino being from Unova, I think similar to Johto, there isn't a lot when looking at its design that screams it should belong here. While adding evolutions to old Pokemon has existed since the dawn of time, one option that I'm shocked wasn't introduced in its base region is Hitmontop. Hitmontop and Tyrogue could have been pretty cool options for the Kanto region, especially considering it's where both Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan were originally from. With this in mind, we could have instead obtained a Tyrogue from the Fighting Dojo, where we would have been able to evolve it ourselves into one of this now trio of options. While you could make a case for the Fighting Dojo to still just give Hitmonlee or Hitmonchan, without breeding existing in the Kanto games, you'd miss out on Hitmontop entirely without a means to breed for Tyrogue, or an additional location to obtain these Pokemon. With this in mind, adding a Tyrogue the player could train up and evolve into another one of these Pokemon would have been a pretty cool addition to this region. One of the things Kalos is best known for is the introduction of fairy types into the region, but a lot of these were more so adding the typing onto older Pokemon. However, one new fairy type I'm fairly surprised to not have seen introduced in the Kalos region was easily Alcremie. Alcremie could have been a pretty cool addition to an otherwise barren region, and it probably could have gotten a lot more focus if it was in these games instead. For starters, due to the general power level of Sword and Shield, we didn't really see much Alcremie, despite its signature cool move Decorate being really strong to boost your opponent's offenses by 2 stages. But in a region like Kalos that lacked overbearing mechanics like Dynamax, or the absurd power creep from Generation 8 onwards, Alcremie would have actually stood out as a powerful but not overbearing fairy type that has a cool focus for doubles. I think for what it's worth, Alcremie is probably about as natural of a fit design-wise in Kalos as it is in Galar, and is one of the few Pokemon I could go either way on. But I think the ability to have gotten actual competitive value from Alcremie was a big reason for making it 6th, as I think it would have been a really cool addition to the Kalos region for that reason. When making this list, I had contemplated very heavily if I was going to even include a pseudo-legendary into the mix to begin with, as a lot of them are pretty well placed into their respective regions. But one mon that I thought had a lot of potential to exist in another region has gotta be Garchomp. For Garchomp, I'll be the first to admit it probably would have been absurd existing in the Generation 3 scene, but it thematically is a cool fit. Garchomp, being a land shark, could have fit really well in a region where most of the region has a focus towards the water. There easily could have been some lore where Garchomp had evolved from something like Sharpedo, and inevitably went from being a more marine type of Pokemon towards being a terrifying titan of the land, especially in a region where that was the entire focus of our evil teams. I actually think it's a pretty big crime conceptually that Garchomp wasn't included in this roster of mons, and it fits this region way better than Sinnoh, design-wise at least. My guess is it's mostly due to the typing and ability combination for Generation 3 standards being fairly overbearing. And honestly, I could totally get that, if that was the reason they tried to table Garchomp until a later generation. Since even for in-game standards, Garchomp would be fairly ridiculously unbalanced in this current stage of Pokemon. Sinnoh has a horrible inclusion of fire-type options. If you want a fire-type that's new to Sinnoh, your choices are Infernape, the new trait evolution Magmortar, or Rotom Heat without waiting until the post-game. This was probably the biggest flaw with the region's Pokédex by a landslide. However, our 4th entry, Coalossal, would be a huge fix for that. Coalossal has a very easy place to slot its encounter towards an option in the Oreburgh Mines. Oreburgh is a huge coal mining town, and this is literally the coal Pokemon. I feel like this was a fairly easy softball when making these games. This would have given a pretty cool, albeit weak, fire type to Sinnoh for the timing. That could have eventually been utilized with the Galar games still if it was to still keep a Gmax form. With Coalossal, we'd have not only a cool option Rourke could use for incoming grass types with Roly-Coly, but also a really fun option for Flint's team that especially in the original games lacked the fire type mons. When the Alola region was first revealed, a lot of players were expecting us to receive a dolphin Pokemon, myself included. Yet, Palafin took another 6 years to introduce itself into the franchise. Palafin would have been the perfect fit for the Alola region, which was based around a tropical paradise. Encountering Finizen in the Mantine Surf game would have been a really cool option for the Generation 7 games, or even at one of the many coastlines that the Alola region had available to it. While Palafin itself is a pretty overbearing Pokemon at times in competitive, I don't think it'd have been the most overbearing for a generation that, especially in doubles, was plagued by fatter archetypes. In singles, it'd have probably still landed itself in Ubers, only to get buried alive under the primals. But it could have been fun in doubles, where it'd fear the Tapu's existence at pretty much every turn, while still having options capable of helping to respond to how bulky some of these doubles teams were in 2017. Okay, so I gotta start off with saying our runner-up entry would have a lot of weird factors going on with it should this have been introduced in Kanto. But design-wise, it fits way too well with this region to be ignored, despite the massive complications it causes. Number 2, I think Gholdengo makes a lot of sense in the Kanto region. With a region that introduced the Game Corner to the franchise, we could have had a pretty easy means to encounter Gholdengo through playing the Game Corner machines to earn coins and purchase yourself. Or potentially even to spawn an encounter to fight Gimmighoul or Gholdengo to catch yourself. This would have also given us a cool ghost type that isn't going to be bullied by psychic types like Gengar did due to its secondary poison typing. Speaking of typing though, the only reason I don't have Gholdengo at number 1 on my list today would definitely be from the lack of this very crucial typing in the region. You could make a case for Gholdengo joining Hoenn if you wanted to introduce it with a region that involves steel types. But I think introducing it in a region with the Game Corner still existing was honestly a freebie. Finally, let's talk about our top entry for Pokemon that should have existed in another region, Cursola. Cursola honestly was a huge missed opportunity, waiting one generation too long to be released in Galar rather than Alola. The Alola region is where the Pokemon Toxapex was introduced, which is considered a natural predator to Cursola. There could have been some lore that all the Cursola in the region died, causing the spirits of the new Alolan Cursola to haunt the seas. Alola also was the first region we got new regional variants in, and giving us one that had an entirely new evolution would have been a pretty big deal. I can only imagine the sole reason Cursola wasn't introduced in Alola was because every Alolan form was based around an existing Kanto Pokemon. But even despite that, I feel like the Alola region was literally made for this evolutionary line. So that's my list for the top 10 Pokemon I feel like should belong to other regions. Let me know your guys' lists down below, as I'd love to hear what Pokemon you feel should have came from other regions too.